I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio program. I'm Clint Richardson, and this is apparently show number 100 for the Corporation Nation. Yay! It is the 14th of March, Friday. We're going to have a guest in the second hour. Actually, it's that time of month again. For Karen. Oh, no, that's not what I mean. It's that time of month again for the United We Strike Marathon, which happens one weekend a month. But this time I told Karen, look, you've been doing a great job, but it's time to actually get serious and actually do what it is you set out to do, which is to boycott something. Actually boycott one thing and make a true difference. So we're going to talk about that in the second hour. And our chosen company was Nestle. Nestle's the perfect corporation to boycott because Nestle's one of the most evil corporations, and it's a foreign corporation that supports Israel. All right, so we'll talk about that in the second hour. So we're really going to try to hopefully get people to actually think about this. We can actually make a difference, every single one of us, if we just focus on one entity that is harming us, stealing water rights all around the world, making people fat and unhealthy with their food substances that aren't quite food. But we could actually make a huge difference. We could stop Nestle, or at least harm it in some way, financially, by boycotting its products. Every product it makes, there's someone else that makes a similar product. So, we're gonna actually try a real boycott on one single company. That said, I wanted to go over today because I think the most important thing, well, I say that a lot, don't I? One of the most important things we talk about again, and I repeat all the time, is the Lieber Code. The Lieber Code, recognized internationally as the instructions for the government of armies of the United States in the field, once labeled as General Orders 100 by President Lincoln when he declared martial law. He didn't declare war. We have to remember there was no war because there was no recognized nation. If Lincoln would have recognized a nation, he would have had to have given them, he would have had to be nice. It would have been it would have been a big mess. So there was never really recognized an actual war, even though history and the people who write it tell us there was a civil quote-unquote war. There was never a actual war. Because remember, war has a very specific meaning. It must be declared lawfully by the people, which is Congress. That's not what this was. General Orders number 100 was very similar to a presidential executive order. In fact, it was an executive order. It was the first executive order to my knowledge. There might have been others, but in this modern time with this post-Civil War Constitution, that was it. And at this moment, this was the end because the Congress did not assemble. It was basically an unlawful action by the president of the Union. The Union was broken. So I want to go over the what came of this, the Lieber Code, and how what we have is not a government of the people or of man. We have a government of armies of the United States. That's what we have. We have a military dictatorship. I can't tell you. I mean, I don't know and understand why people keep supporting it. I don't understand. I mean, other than their lack of understanding, a people that truly perishes because of their lack of knowledge. So I want to just read I want to read this. I don't think we can read this enough. And to be perfectly frank, this information should be sent to every person in the military. Every soldier, every general, everyone. Everyone needs to know this, because we have to get through to our soldiers that they are protecting government from us and themselves. Because, of course, if they get out of line, same thing happens to them. The soldiers come and ask any veteran who's been harmed by government. They'll tell you. You know, we have to get this out to soldiers, because government relies on one and only one thing: force, violent force, through the military and its police, all of them being federal. I don't care what your county, your city, your district, I don't care what they tell you, your state, everybody is federal. Because it's military, it's a military dictatorship. And by the way, the word dictator, we have to rethink what the word dictator is, as we do with most of our words. Okay, what does it mean? We think, the dictator is those evil people, right, that do harm to the... No. A dictator simply means one and only one thing in law: to dictate. To write a law. Well, that's what you have. You have both Congress and a president, but mostly the president, who dictates the law when his fellow dictators decide they don't want to dictate the law. This, of course, is a false paradigm, a false competition that we like to believe that Congress, the president made another directive or executive order. What are we going to do? Well, tomorrow you could vote and stop it. That's what you could do, Congress. But you don't, because you're not in competition. You don't end the Fed because you're not in competition. You don't reassume the Treasury because you're not in competition. You're dictators. That's all you are. You dictate law. What you call law, anyway. And when we don't like it, you force us to obey. Simple and elegant. That's what government is. It's a powerful force, a force that cannot be reckoned with, and that's what we're talking about. So how do you govern that force? Well, in the Lieber Code, we're going to Article 1. Remember, articles were also in what? The Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. They were articles. That's right. Article 1 says a place, district, or country occupied by an enemy stands, in consequence of the occupation, under the martial law of the invading or occupying army, whether any proclamation declaring martial law or any public warning to the inhabitants has been issued or not. Martial law is the immediate and direct effect and consequence of occupation or conquest. Okay, part 2, very important, of Article 1. The presence of a hostile army proclaims its martial law. Okay, let's break this apart. Martial law is the immediate and direct effect and consequence of occupation. It is not the immediate and direct effect of when you get out of order. Okay, we have to clear this up. Martial law is always there. It is because you are an occupied state or country that you have martial law. Martial law is just military rule. We'll be back.
First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here is in your world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking about the so-called war, which really wasn't a war. I'm gonna kind of prove that to you here through a little information from the government. Very interestingly, but again, Article 1, a place, district, or country, that's your state, your individual state, occupied by an enemy, stands in consequence of the occupation under the martial law of the invading or occupying army, whether any proclamation declaring it or any public warning happens. So you don't have to be told, folks, that you're under military rule. You don't have to be told that the courts are a military church. You don't have to know anything, because what we have is a matrix. We have a false government posing as a real government. In other words, we have a de facto corporation posing as the lawful de jure government. That's what we have. They don't have to tell you that that's the case. And as we'll see, all they have to do is just pretend that the same law that existed before that time exists at the same time. Any military dictator can do the same. I dictate that this is now a military-occupied nation of countries called states, and that the same law that applied before is going to be copied over, and it's going to be reapplied, and we're going to pretend like everything's just hunky-dory. The United States is occupying the United States of America, the 50 states united. The United States is Washington, D.C., not one of us. The problem, and why the military is so important, why they need to be reached out to, is because they're the ones enforcing their own military occupation of their own children, their own parents, their own family. We're doing it to ourselves, and it's because no public warning has been issued, no proclamation has been undeclared. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the presence of a hostile army proclaims its martial law. That's why you have a military base in every state. That's why you have a military base in, 100 and something countries. Ask anybody in Germany or Japan. They know they're an occupied nation. The only difference between them and us is we don't know it. We've been dumbed down to the point of just insanity. Article 2, martial law does not cease during the hostile occupation. Martial law is always there. Just because it's invoked at some point does not mean it wasn't there before. If you have the ability to declare martial law, then you had it before. Martial law does not cease during the hostile occupation except by special proclamation ordered by the commander-in-chief of the military or by special mention in the Treaty of Peace concluding the war. When the occupation of a place or territory continues beyond the conclusion of peace as one of the conditions of the same. Again, occupation of a place or territory, that's what states are, folks. They're just corporations within a territory of the United States. That's what it even says in the Enabling Acts if you actually go read them. When the occupation of a place or territory continues beyond the conclusion of peace as one of the conditions of the same. Now, let's go to the government website. This is from the National Park Service. It's talking about the Appomattox Courthouse, National Historic Park. And here's what it says in the question and answer section. Beginning peace and reunion. Oh, peace, huh? Well, that's interesting. Let's read. On Palm Sunday, April 9th, 1865, General Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, signaled the end of the Southern states' attempt to create a separate nation. Well, gee, if you only ended the attempt to create a separate nation, then that means there was no separate nation ever recognized, right? It set the stage for the emergence of an expanded and more powerful federal government. Yeah, well, that's certainly true. In a sense, the struggle over how much power the central government would hold had finally been settled. And guess what, folks? It was settled militarily, and that never ended. Why do I say that? Because when we go to the next frequently asked question, which is, where was the treaty signed? Well, why is that important? Well, let me read again. Martial law, according to Article 2 of the Lieber Code, martial law does not cease during the hostile occupation except by special proclamation ordered by the commander-in-chief or by special mention in the Treaty of Peace concluding the war. All right, what does it say? Where was the treaty signed? There was no, this is from the government. There was no treaty signed to end the Civil War. The surrender at Appomattox Courthouse was a military surrender of an army which was surrounded. A military surrender. The Confederate government never surrendered, and even had it wanted to, this is right from government, even if it had wanted to surrender, the United States, Washington, D.C., the government would likely not have accepted. Are you hearing this? To do so would have legally acknowledged the existence of the Confederate States of America and would have legitimized it and given it certain legal status internationally. In other words, the people would be protected from tyranny and horrors. They would be recognized. Oh, man. Continuing. Treaties are between two nations, and the U.S. would never concede the legal existence of the Confederacy, even though it had a government, armies, taxes, and all the trappings of a modern government. Straight from government's mouth, there was never, again, there was no treaty signed to end the Civil War. Are you getting this, folks? There was no end to the Civil War. It turned into simply a peacekeeping operation. It still exists today because it wasn't about slavery. If I had those quotes in front of me, I'd read Lincoln where he says over and over, I don't want to stop slavery. I don't want to end slavery. That's not my goal. Folks, we are under a military occupation that we have been convinced is de jure and that we have been convinced to pretend is something other than it's not. Martial law does not cease except by special proclamation or by special mention in the Treaty of Peace concluding the war. War has not been concluded, and you are all enemies of the state. Okay, the government oath, the oath that everyone takes, even as we say, are you an oath keeper? Yeah, they're oath keepers because they take an oath to protect government from enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, we read the other day that the U.S. Code very clearly says that any one of us can be an enemy of the United States. Article 3. Martial law in a hostile country consists in the suspension by the occupying military authority of the criminal and civil law and of the domestic administration and government in the occupied place or territory. Folks, that is the United States of America. All of it. Every state. I don't care where you live, folks. You are under military occupation. Because the law was suspended, replaced by the occupying military codes of justice, if you want to call it that. Okay, so they didn't get rid of the current government. They just said, here's your contract, sign it. You're under our rule. If you don't like it, we'll hang you. I mean, that's basic. I'm exaggerating, but that is, these people could either choose to go along with it, or, as we saw in so many of the southern states, Georgia especially, they replaced the lawfully elected leaders of that state with Negroes. which was against the state constitution, because the state constitution no longer had any validation. We'll be back, folks. Welcome back. Oh, we're talking about now. Some of you might say, "Oh my goodness, he must be a racist." Oh, you fools! People, how many times can we say that every word has a dualistic meaning? What does Negro mean? Well, according to attorney T. Browder in the Browder File, 22 Essays on the African American Experience, which was published in 2000. Yes, it's an attorney, but this is factual information. The Portuguese were the first to enslave Africans. In other words, the Portuguese were the first to buy Africans from other Africans. And the black Africans have been selling black Africans since the whole thing began. In fact, the United States Census data actually says that in certain places in the United States, there were more black slave traders than there were white ones. But it's also important to understand that they called them Negroes, Negroes. Why? Because in Spanish that means black skin. But see, that was a long time ago. Since 1444, when the language started changing and the thing became legal, when the real slave trade began, the adjective Negro became a noun. Remember what a noun is? That's right. It became the legitimate legal name of a newly enslaved people. The word black in the Euro culture was generally associated with aspects of death. So you have basically a case where the word death is derived from the Greek word necro, which means dead, and very similar to the sound Negro. So why not, just like every other word, just transfer it over? They're already called Negroes. Let's just call the Necros the Negroes. Why would they say a black man is necro or Negro? Why would they say a black man is dead? Well, as we've discussed, Negro or necro is a reference to the physical, spiritual, and mental death of a person, place, or thing. A noun. Remember? Now, what's interesting, there's a gentleman named Horace Greeley who died in 1872, but he was the founder of the New York Tribune. And, of course, we've discussed that all these guys were bloodline-related cousins, all these corporate owners. Here's what he said. I want you to listen to this very carefully. He says, quote, "We have stricken the slave shackles from 4 million human beings," in other words, the Negroes, "and brought all laborers to a common level. Not so much by the elevation of former slaves as by practically reducing the whole working population, white and black, to a condition of serfdom. While boasting of our noble deeds, we are careful to conceal the ugly fact that by an iniquitous money system, we have nationalized a system of oppression which, though more refined, is not less cruel than the old system of chattel slavery." Founder of the New York Tribune, he's telling you folks that you're all slaves. We didn't free the slaves. The 13th Amendment made us all slaves. You see the difference? Men are not enemies because of their skin color. They're enemies because of legal status. They're enemies because of their nouns, their names, their status. Guess what, folks? There were just as many white Negroes in history as there were black Negroes, because the word Negro, stemming from necro or death, refers to the civil death of a man. Civil death means you are not recognized as a man. You're recognized with no rights whatsoever except as property, as chattel. Okay, that's what we've been sold, because remember, government had to well, it had to convince you to give up your natural rights in exchange for political ones. In other words, subjection to government laws without the protections that the natural law allows. That's where we are. Okay? Now, when I said they put Negroes into the office, yes, I meant black men with no rights or status. They were free men, but they weren't allowed to vote. They could not qualify to be in office. That's what the Constitution referred to, when no Negroes could be in office. Yes, there were a bunch of racists. I get it, whatever. Okay? But Negro did not necessarily refer to skin color, is the point. We've been fooled. Excuse me. The occupying military authority. So the country consists in the suspension by the occupying military authority of the criminal and civil law and of domestic administration and government in the occupied place or territory. And in the substitution of military rule, according to Article 3 of the Lieber Code, the substitution of military rule and, more importantly, force, the substitution of military rule and force for the same, meaning the civil and other laws. Are, you could claim, I don't care what you claim, folks. You could say we're in civil law, common law, natural law, whatever. You're under military rule. That's the only law that you know. The problem is you don't know it. You don't recognize it. You don't see it. And you defend it patriotically like a religion. Now, I know I'm not talking to a lot of my listeners, I know, but there's a lot of people that just don't grasp this. I wish they would. But what else does it say in Article 3? The commander, well, that's the commander-in-chief. That's why he's called that, folks. The commander of the forces may proclaim that the administration of all civil and penal law shall continue. That's right, continue, even though it's now under military authority. So it's like a doppelganger, a false civil and penal law, either wholly or in part, as in times of peace, unless otherwise ordered by the military authority. Well, there you go. The de jure law stays in place, if there is really such a thing as de jure in this country, nation. But the de jure law stays in place in times of peace. What peace really means war, because we do live in an Orwellian society. The peacekeeping operations, just because they don't call it war, unless otherwise ordered by the military authority. The military authority, of course, is the commander-in-chief, the governors of each state. Guess what, folks? You elect the commander-in-chief of the National Guard each time you vote for governor. And the governor gives over his National Guard to the president whenever the president orders his, basically, general. Up in Canada, they actually are honest, and they call the governor a general. And our general, of course, has a lieutenant and an attorney general. Folks, it's military. We're under martial law, which is just military authority. But in times of peace, what they mean by that is that you're not waking up to it. You're not fighting it. You're in peace. You're in harmony. Remember the difference between consent and consent? Harmonic resonance. We all sit here and pretend everything is okay. Meanwhile, we're under martial law. Article 4. Martial law is simple military authority exercised in accordance with the laws and usages of war. Did you know there were laws and usages of war? Well, you'd be surprised at what they say. Such things as it's okay to starve the enemy, which is you, by the way. Martial law is simply military authority exercised in accordance with the laws and usages of war. Military oppression is not martial law. Oh. It is the abuse of the power which that law confers. Okay, so we're living under an abuse of power. As martial law is executed by military force, it is incumbent upon those who administer it to be strictly guided by the principles of justice, honor, and humanity. Virtues adorning a soldier even more than other men for the very reason that he possesses the power of his arms against the unarmed. You gonna talk to your soldiers? You gonna talk to your sons and daughters? We'll be back.
Scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. All our sensory systems. And then it explodes.
Do I sound upset? Do I sound like someone who's militarily occupied? Well, yeah, that's exactly how I should sound. I'm sorry if that offends you. But let me make sure you understand Article 4 here before we go on. And, of course, we're only going to have time to get a few of these. We'll continue this whenever I get another chance. But martial law is simply listen to this, folks, because you have the wrong idea of what martial law is. And it's promoted by your shock jocks. Oh, no, there's going to be martial law. There already is, folks. It's existed since before you were born. Martial law, according to Article 4 of the Lieber Code, martial law is simply, very simple, military authority. All right? Martial law is simply military authority exercised in accordance with the laws and usages of war. That is the United States. Okay, what's the next sentence? This is what Alex Jones continuously tells you. But here's the truth. Military oppression is not martial law. Oh, but the police state is going to come down on... No. The police state is just part of the already existing martial law, because martial law is simply military authority exercised in accordance with the laws and usages of war. It does not cease. And because it was never ceased after the so-called Civil War, it still exists. Make sense? Martial law is executed by military force. That's what we have. We have an occupation. Remember? What did the first article say? The presence of a hostile army proclaims its martial law. They don't have to harm you. They don't have to be doing anything to you at this particular moment. You are under martial law because an army base and several army bases are located in each and every one of your countries, from California to Maine, from Germany to Japan. And the military is us. It's us people pledging to protect this whole system of military occupation of the United States, making a pledge to protect the continuity of that thing, that monster, that beast that we're all taking the mark from. Your sons and daughters, your fathers, your mothers, whoever, they're taking a pledge against you because you are a domestic enemy. By the way, when it says it's executed by martial military force, and it's saying that the soldiers need to be, or the military needs to be guided by the principles of justice, honor, and humility. Well, guess what, folks? That's exactly what Masons say. Justice, honor, humility, all the things that Masons tell you to convince you that their little den of thieves, their secret society, which judges and police turn out to be, and they raise their hands up and they say, oh, my brother needs assistance. And the judge says, yeah, you murdered someone in cold blood and you raped another one, but that's okay because you're a brother in the Masonic fraternity, so we're going to let you go. Okay, this is a Masonic thing because they invoke some sort of screwy logic and even invoke God to tell you why it is that you're occupied by force and should be killed and starved and everything else. Again, we'll get to that. It says, right, very clearly that starving you is okay as long as it is for a political cause. All right? Article 5. Martial law should be less stringent in places and countries fully occupied and fairly conquered. Folks, that's you. You are so fairly conquered. You are so fully occupied that they barely need to do anything to keep you in line. For God's sake, you're now checking yourself out of grocery stores. That's how controlled and conquered you are. You go to machines to get their money and spend it and get taxed. I mean, you are so controlled. It's amazing. Much greater severity may be exercised in places or regions where actual hostilities exist or are expected and must be prepared for. Well, guess what, folks? That explains the Middle East, because at least they have the courage and the balls to stand up for what their lifestyle is to protect their family. Of course, we're just murdering them in cold blood. We're calling them terrorists in their own land because the United States considers it their land. You see? It's a military occupation of Greater Israel. In other words, all that land. Its most complete sway is allowed, even in the commander's own country. Who's the commander, folks? That's the president, or I should say the office of president. The man doesn't really matter because the power of the office is the problem. It's going to be corporation soul. It's going to be passed to the next bloodline cousin. Its most complete sway is allowed even in the commander's own country when face to face with the enemy. That's you. You're all potential enemies because of the absolute necessities of the case and of the paramount duty to defend the country against invasion. We're talking about Washington, D.C. here. Absolute necessities of the case. Well, there's that invocation again, the rule or doctrine of necessity. Because remember, necessity knows no law, especially in military campaigns and military occupations, military rule, martial law, because of absolute necessities. It goes on, it says to save the country, which really means the continuity of the corporate government. To save the country is paramount to all other considerations. Hey, folks, that means everything that you believe about this Constitution thing, that it gives you rights. That means any right that you proclaim. It means every status that you claim or disclaim. All you free men, all you people who claim to be one thing or the other because you've gone through some system of law. Folks, the country is paramount to all other considerations, including your own. Now, you can call yourself, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to call myself a free man under God. That doesn't mean that this military force cannot come down upon me, and that's why I keep telling people you cannot ignore the problem by simply leaving the system, because you're in what the United States considers an occupied territory called a state, and the presence of a hostile army declares it's martial law. So we could pretend all we want. We could talk with Daniel and Bert and Tammy Pepperman and all these people, but in reality, the reality of this is that we are under martial law no matter what we claim to be, okay? Because the country is paramount to all other considerations. We have time for one more, maybe two. Article 6. All civil and penal law shall continue to take its usual course in the enemy's places and territories under martial law, unless interrupted or stopped by order of the occupying military power. But all the functions of the hostile government, that's the United States, that's the government that used to be there, the lawful one, if you want to call it that, the congressional one, legislative, executive, or administrative, whether of a general, provincial or local character, that's your local government, cease under martial law, or continue only with the sanction. The sanction. Sanctions aren't just a harm. They're not just a harm. They actually support martial law. Or if deemed necessary, the participation of the occupier or invader. Your local government is nothing but a military occupying force that we call management, administration, magistrates. That's enough of that for today, huh? We'll be back with Karen Quinn Tostado. Stay tuned.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men. Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, back to the Corporation Nation. We're going to have to calm down. We're going to have to stop talking about the military-occupied nation that we live in, country, state, district, territory. And we're going to talk about something that we can actually do all together, which is to boycott. Now, boycott, I believe last time we had Karen Quinn Tostado on the program, we read the story of a Mr. Boycott and how the people of Ireland rose up and defeated Mr. Boycott, the land, the employer, the taxer, the taxman of those days, and they won in a sense. They drove him out of the area because he was so unjust, and his taxes were unjust, and his fees and land rents were so unjust. So let's talk about what we can do as a collective people, even when we are under this state of martial law continuously without break since the Civil War, because we don't live in a legitimate nation. We don't live under a legitimate government. What can the people actually do? Now, we're forced, basically, for the most part, to transact business with the dollar if we want to buy food and actually have any kind of decent lifestyle. Of course, government has the monopoly on that money. What we can do is make a choice. We can choose to spend out of necessity, by the way, because remember, necessity knows no law. If you are going to starve, if it's a choice between starving or being harmed and spending the dollar, you're going to spend the dollar. There's no conscionable bad thing about that. Okay? The law of necessity is very important. It's part of life. So what we can do, however, is choose who and what we buy our products from. Now, let me give you an example. Now, my dog, Hector, just turned 10 years old this Saturday. Now, it doesn't sound that old for a dog, except that it's a Great Dane. Great Danes, my vet said she's only seen Great Danes live to 7 years old. And, of course, I try to convince her that that's because we don't vaccinate dogs. Therefore, he's living and has no arthritis and has no problems whatsoever. He's fully mentally capable and wonderful, wonderful dog. Everybody loves him. Yet she's never seen one live past 7 years old, right? We expect 1 or 2 more years out of this little guy. Well, big guy. Wonderful, wonderful dog. What we don't do is feed him Purina. Purina is made by Nestle. Nestle Purina. It's actually called Nestle Purina Pet Care Company because really, it's a bunch of crap. What I do, to take care of a pet, an animal, you shouldn't treat that animal any differently than you treat your body. You should provide that dog with the best nutrition possible. Again, possible. Of course, nobody can afford to feed their animals a steak every night, like the cartoons. But you can make a choice in products. All right. Nestle, not such a good product. Purina, I should say, pet care. And, of course, they've wormed their ways into veterinarians across the nation who don't question anything about it. That's just one example of Nestle Corporation. We're going to talk about Nestle because we've decided, me and Karen, that Nestle would be a perfect corporation to boycott. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Hi, Clint. Thank you for having me.
Well,
and thanks for the info you sent also on a little bit more of the history and the Zionist connection between Nestle, which I had not previously thought of.
Well, yeah, it's pretty shocking when you actually read most major corporations out there are heavy donators, supporters, and a lot of them have corporate offices in Israel. It's pretty shocking, really, when you boil it down. But Nestle in particular is certainly one of those. Another good reason. Nestle is a Swiss company. All right? So what possible issue could you have in America by boycotting a Swiss company? A lot of companies are in China, but they're still American companies. Nestle is a Swiss company that has infiltrated into just about every arena in the food product market, including bottled water. So let's start off first by explaining what your marathon is. We had you on a month ago, and we talked about the United We Strike marathon. But tell people again, and tell people, the purpose and what you're trying to do, and why we think it's so important to actually start focusing and organizing.
Well, the marathon is once a month, the second Saturday of every month. We have an international dedicated team of producers and hosts who join hands, and we start at, I think, about 5 o'clock in the morning in German, in Pacific time. And at 7 o'clock, it turns to English, and then we go until 5:30 at night, uniting people from all over the world and doing what we can to help educate them so we understand that we are all facing the same tyrants in the background. The purpose, the mission statement at United We Strike is, our goal is to inspire unity and peaceful noncompliance, using our far greater numbers to resist tyranny by refusing immoral orders in order to co-create a better world of independent, accountable individuals, fully capable of making their own decisions and living lives of peace, prosperity, and abundance. the thinking behind this, Clint, is that I recognized long ago that we outnumber them. We outnumber them by the millions, if not billions. And yet we are subjected to experimentation on us in every level imaginable, and some we can't even fathom, through geoengineering, through vaccines. And when you really get down to it, we only need, as human beings, 5 things, in my opinion: clean air, clean water, healthy food, self-sufficient communities, and love. We need to love ourselves enough to understand and admit to ourselves just how badly we've been lied to and mistreated and stolen from, and then be able to take steps together to stop it and to realize that our worth, our true value, does not lie outside of ourselves in colored pieces of paper or metal, but it is what we intrinsically can bring to the table as we create in cooperation and self-ownership. If no harm, injury, or loss occurs, then we can be busy with the jobs of healing ourselves and our families. But until we break through this matrix, until we free ourselves, we will continue to be taken advantage of and taken down individually by the thugs in power, the evil, lying, inbred, traitorous eugenicists we've been trained to call elite.
We've been trained to call them heroes. Or fathers.
And to revere them with all their badges and their diplomas and, their big-headedness. What are they wearing? What are they saying? Traitors.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before. We're recognizing a status that does not, come from nature. So we need to stop recognizing it. One of the ways we can do that is boycotting. We'll talk more about that when we come back.
This is real, versus this ride. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love.
All right, folks. Welcome back. We're with Quinn Tostado of UnitedWeStrike.com. Also, you do a little stint on Rent, which actually you were doing the last hour that I was ranting about the Lieber Code and martial law, which is every Friday, correct? Are you muted?
Actually, I'm doing it once a month. What we've done is kind of expanded the team, but because I had stepped back for a while, but I can't step back and watch World War III, which is already happening, and not say anything and try and make a difference so that people stop following this stupid crap we're fed. But we've got a different team, so I rotate. I'm going to take the second Friday of every month, which is before, hopefully sometimes before the marathon and also before the 15th of the month, to promote action, and today to promote beginning a boycott of Nestle as we educate ourselves. Deborah Tavares and Christina Consolo and Cindy Pikulis will be filling out the other 3 Fridays, and where there's a 4th Friday, we're going to have a live round table.
Very nice. And on United We Strike, I mean, you get a whole host of people. Why don't you name some of the people? You got Vinny Eastwood, and you got Hal Anthony, and all kinds of really great hosts that have their own shows as well.
Well, we've got a smaller segment. Usually it's about now a 27-minute segment. And Hal, since he stopped working for Oracle, while he is supportive, has really been tuned into doing his own thing. But Hal was supportive for years.
Yeah.
We do have Deborah Tavares. You've been part of the marathon. Bert has been part of the marathon. Michael Bodnarik has been part of the marathon. We've got Dinah Everett Snyder, who does great work. And actually, have you met Dinah yet?
I don't think so.
I will have to introduce you. She's done terrific work with veterans and cannabis juice, which has really been very efficient in terms of being healthy and helping them to physically get stronger. She has a whole study on it. And then actually smoking marijuana for a 24-hour period, which amazingly enough helped the soldiers who were in her group to break through some of that post-traumatic stress and understand what was going on and that it wasn't their fault, that they had been so lied to and so aggressively what do they call it when they go into schools and they promote joining the military program, and they when they're out there stumping to get more children to join the military. What do they call that again?
Sure, it's
now
that you say it, I can't think of it.
Recruiting.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you, Al. Yeah. So these soldiers who she's worked with have had really great benefits to not only themselves but their whole families as they start to regain their health and their sanity and understand the depth of this plot against them, which again brings me back to how can we call ourselves civilized people when the so-called leaders of our nations and politics are so lame that they cannot resolve their own differences but have to send our children to die for it.
Well, mostly it's to protect the corporate structure, which is really brings us back to Nestle. And remember, the United States government is a major investor and shareholder in Nestle, as are most governments around the world. So we do live in a corpocracy. Not that corporations control government, but that government as shareholders of corporations are the proxy voting corporate governance of corporations. This is very important. Remember that government is just a tool. So when I say government owns, I mean that there is a corporation that has massive stock investments, and that tool, that power base is being used by people, of course, to further the corporations, to further the thing. So to say that, well, you can't say that corporations own government because government doesn't have stock. Simple as that. There is no ownership. You can say that government owns corporations because they actually have physical, verifiable ownership stock. So it's really that simple. So let's get back to Nestle, because Nestle it's actually shocking how many products they make. And of course they put a different name on all the products so that you don't really know that every single bottled water brand that you buy and competes against each other is basically from Nestle. Most of the popular ones, anyway, not every single one. But tell us, let's start off with this documentary that it's called Globesity. Why don't you tell people about Globesity and what's happening with the water rights and stuff around the world?
Well, Globesity, it didn't get into all of the water rights. What I did was take notes on Globesity that I can share, and I also took from his own words the CEO of Nestle. I took his words, and I can tell you what he said about the water and about what's happening in the third world countries, which now are giving the biggest profits to these corporations who are dealing in these so-called food stuffs.
Well, and let me just say before you start, you mentioned earlier World War III. And see, what we need to realize is that World War III started long ago, but it's called something a little different. It's called the Third World War. You see, it started by the takeover of all these nations, taking over their rights, their mineral rights, their water rights, in exchange for, loans and currencies and stuff like that are obviously they're never going to be able to pay back. And so it's a third world war that is now that most of that has been conquered. Who knows what World War III will entail, but please continue.
All right. In his own words, okay, and this is CEO Peter Brabeck from Corinthia. He's the head of Nestle, which is the largest foodstuff, that's their word, foodstuff corporation in the world, with a turnover of around 90 billion Swiss francs or $65 billion and approximately 275,000 direct employees. They are the 27th largest company in the world. Now, I took this from a post that was put in 2013, so they may even be larger. He says, and I quote, Today's people believe that everything that comes from nature is good. That represents a huge change because until recently we always learned that nature could be pitiless. Man is now in the position of being able to provide some balance to nature. But in spite of this, we have something approaching a shibboleth, his words which seem to be like a meme or something, that everything that comes from nature is good. A good example is the organic movement. Organic is now best, but organic is not best. After 15 years of eating GM food products in the U.S., not one single case has occurred from eating them to date. Okay, now that was the direct translation. Not one single case. Okay, I didn't get the other words that were there, but not one single case of illness is what this cretin is referring to, when nothing could be further from the truth. This is an out-and-out lie. Now, we'll go back to his words. And in spite of this, we're all so uneasy about it in Europe that something might happen to us. It's hypocrisy more than anything else, which again is a huge lie. When they introduced genetically altered potatoes into the European atmosphere, they had lots of problems with that, as well as savor tomatoes. And a genetically altered form of tryptophan actually ended up being responsible for causing death. There are these genetically altered foods, when they're given to animals, are increasing the infertility. They are not helpful.
Well, it's even worse because you combine the GMOs, you combine all the ingredients. And I mean, some ingredients will combine to form such things as artificial synthetic opiates and other things. We don't need fluoride anymore. You've got basically all this horrible things that combine to make disease. We'll be back, folks.
Hi, neighbor. Welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Or maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn.
All right, folks, welcome back. Now, Karen, you're reading the statement there, and he used the word shibboleth, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And of course, I looked it up, and it says the term originates from the Hebrew word shibboleth, or I'm probably not saying that right, which literally means a part of a plant containing grains, such as an ear of corn or a stalk of grain, or in different contexts, a stream or torrent. So you're kind of correct there to say it's a meme, it's an opinion, if you will, sort of something that's happening. It's hard to explain, I guess. But so why would he possibly use such a word? Probably because he is, in fact. Well, let's just read this. Nestle, the Swiss company, owns 50.1% of Israeli food maker Osam Investments. In December of 2000, Nestle announced that it will invest millions of dollars to operate the new research and development center in Israel. In 1998, Mr. Peter Brabeck Letmath, on behalf of Nestle, received the Jubilee Award by the Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu. And this is the highest tribute ever awarded by the State of Israel in recognition of those individuals and organizations that through their investments and trade relationships have done the most to strengthen the Israel economy. That's good enough for me. Let's boycott Nestle. Why would the man use that particular word that virtually no one would probably know unless you were fluent in the Yiddish of those people? So, that's good enough for me. The fact that it's a foreign corporation. Now, what else, after the arrogance of what he just said and the ridiculous lies, of course no doctor writes on a he's probably telling the truth in a way, because no doctor's going to write you're sick because of GMO foods. So yeah, technically he's probably telling the truth. Of course we know better because we have an educated audience. So what does he say about water?
He says there's that lovely old Austrian folk song, "The dear cattle need water, hallara hallari," if you remember. Which I don't, because I'm not Austrian. But anyway, he references this, and then he says, water is, of course, the most important raw material we have today in the world. It's a question of whether we should privatize the normal water supply for the population. And there are two different opinions on this matter. The one opinion, which I think is extreme, is represented by the NGOs who bang on about declaring water a public right. That means, as a human being, you should have a right to water. That's an extreme solution. I know. Is that sickening? And I'm not through yet. That's the extreme solution. He thinks that human beings should have the right to water. That's extreme.
Blasphemy.
Exactly. And the other view says water is a foodstuff. Like any other, and like any other foodstuff, it should have a market value. Personally, I believe it's better to give a foodstuff a value so that we're all aware that it has a price, and then that one should take specific measures for the part of the population that has no access to this water. And there are many different possibilities there. I'm still of the opinion that the biggest social responsibility of any CEO is to maintain and ensure the successful and profitable future of his enterprise. For only if we can ensure our continued long-term existence will we be in a position to actively participate in the solutions of the problems that exist in the world. We're being able to create jobs, 275,000 here, 1.2 million who are directly dependent on us in principle. That makes about 4.5 million people in total, because behind each of our employees are another 3 people. So we have at least 4.5 million people who are directly dependent on us. If you want to create work, you have to work yourself, not as it was in the past where existing work was distributed. If you remember, the main argument for the 35-hour week was that there was a certain amount of work and it would be better if we worked less and distributed the work amongst more people. This has proved quite clearly to be wrong. If you want to create more work, you have to work more yourself. And with that, we've got to create a positive image of the world for people. And I see absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be positive about the future. We've never had it so good. We've never had so much money. We've never been so healthy. We've never lived as long as we do today. We have everything we want and still go around as if we were in mourning for something. Now, how do you like that?
Well, okay, so again, here's a guy who is actually telling the truth. All right? I want to explain why I take this stand. Because, I mean, the reality is, here is a complete douchebag telling people that we should take something that flows freely and incorporate it, make it artificial status. Isn't for me to boycott this company. But what he is saying, he is saying it as the CEO, the artificial status of a corporation. That's the problem, folks. That's the problem with corporations, because corporations have shareholders. The job of the CEO is to make shareholders a profit. So he is not talking about human beings. He is talking about each of us as individual corporate profit money makers, okay? He is actually being very honest and upfront, which is why I despise everything about the stock market and the corporations that are supported by it, because literally he is telling you exactly what both government and corporations are supposed to do. They're supposed to make money for their shareholders. Who's the biggest shareholder of Nestle? Government. Government, through corporate governance, votes for the CEO by voting who the board of directors is going to be. The government votes for mergers and acquisitions as shareholders of the corporation. We have a huge corpocracy here. Okay, so this guy is simply telling you exactly what a CEO should, which is why CEOs should be hung from the nearest tree.
And yes, from a part of their body that's extremely more painful than just the neck. It takes longer to die. In Brazil, now where okay, back to the movie Globesity. In Brazil, where the obesity is just, again, booming, Nestle pays people to sell their snacks in the suburbs and go door to door with new stock daily. They make smaller packaging so that it's cheaper, and they also change the prices so they make sure that all these people can really afford it. They teach these sales representatives, who of course are grateful to have a job because how else are they going to survive? So they brainwash and propagandize them and teach them, hey, chocolate's a good source of energy. And they add a couple of micronutrients to the other products, and they give their salespeople these beautiful handouts and have them actually compete with the real health experts, going in and telling these malnourished people that in order to help themselves, Nestle products will do the trick, that it's real good for undernutrition and good for children. You know, and in Brazil, which is, again, suffering once more from all of the this crap, more than 380...
And Brazil is some of the most healthy people I've ever seen, by the way.
Well, now it says that this, at least from Globicity, that obesity is growing by 1% a year, and now more than 50% of Brazilians are overweight and or obese.
My God, I was there not 15 years ago, and I'm like, my God, everybody's... If Americans were this healthy, geez, I can imagine. Maybe it's amazing to see how healthy people were there. Are you kidding me?
I'm not. That's why it's so important to watch this film, folks, and start to think about the ramifications. In Brazil, they went, it talks about supermarkets, too, in all these Latin American countries. And now that the hugest profits are not being made inside the United States, where they've already obviously fattened us all up, but now they're taking it into third world countries and actually turning them into third world countries because it's crap they're eating by the criminals who run all politics and police, by these evil, lying, inbred, traitorous eugenicists, these elite who are poisoning the world right in front of us as we do nothing about it but comply because we have not yet united and used our numbers and said, no, profit over people is immoral. Sending our children off to fight and die for criminals who want to centralize banking is immoral. Geoengineering our planet is immoral. When we finally unite and stand up, we can change this, but whether or not we will remains to be seen. And I tell you, Clint, when I stepped back, it was because I realized there's nothing I can do. People don't want to hear about this anymore. I'm not being heard enough through the heart-centered people who really need to understand that we are only here for a little while, and our lives, which could be full of abundance, are screwed up by these liars and thieves who own us or think they own us.
Can't argue with you there. Trust me. The thought of stepping back often occurs to me. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
Quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bail out too big to fail AAA banks again. Fear levels rising as the US crash seems imminent, having smashed the debt ceiling of 14 trillion despite protests and clashes in Athens streets. The IMF imposed structurally unjust programs in Greece, where in fact the term economy entered our language from the Greek oikonomia, meaning household management. Well, how are we managing? Theories abound, but in practice, does anyone actually know what the hell's even happening? Well, seems we've come to our global auditing, our financial day of reckoning. It's an interesting quandary. Have we invested too much in this enterprise to admit the solution might lie in its very demise? For our real economy is something much broader. It's GDP measures, not...
All right, folks, welcome. Its own demise. Karen, listen, we have very limited time. I was going to take calls, but I think I'm not going to. Just because I want you to continue and tell people why, Nestle is the perfect company to boycott. It's the perfect foreign company that supports Israel in major ways. One of the largest companies in the world. It's killing not only us, but our pets. It's doing horrible things. And it puts products out there. You have to learn all the products. Because again, if you look, you've got Perrier, Calistoga, and the other one, which are all the sparkling waters that compete against each other, and they're all made by the same dang company. We're tricked into buying certain bottled water brands for brand recognition, and they're all made by Nestle. It's amazing, the products. Baby food, you know, the fluoride in baby food and all the baby supplements. Yeah, that's Nestle that's doing that, a foreign corporation that government fully supports through stock investment. All you pensioners out there, you fully support it because you allow government to invest your money for you. All right? So, Karen, why should we boycott Nestle?
Well, if the fact that the CEO of the company thinks that it's extreme for human beings to have the right to water, if that doesn't really shake the very foundations of your belief systems, if a CEO of a huge corporation, the 27th largest corporation in 2013, again, maybe it's larger now, but to actually say that, you know that they want to privatize the water, and to have to be forced to use Coca-Cola in a baby's bottle, which, okay, is not a Nestle product, but another one of these corporations that we need to boycott, if that doesn't scare you. And in baby food, when the CEO talks about the fact that no harm is coming from genetically altered foods, he is a liar. And Clint, you are probably right that, of course, it's not printed up in the mainstream because that's all owned. And any of the studies that are owned are done by the corporations who are pushing their products. So more products that actually are full of genetically altered things are baby products. The ones that are out there, Cerelac is a Nestle product, Gerber, Graduates, Nature's, Nestum. You know, they've got bottled water. You can go to Nestle.com and look at the products that they have. Pure Life water. Oh, tastier and healthy. Playing a role in social development. Weight Watchers. And then you watch this film, Globesity. And you hear that actually obesity-related illness in Brazil cost their health system approximately $2.1 billion if it was United States money. And you look at the fact that they train their people to go house to house, door to door in these countries where you've already got malnourishment. Again, why? Well, because these corporations would rather make profit and force you to pay for things instead of growing them yourselves. Actually, in Florida, there was a woman who was just convicted for living off the grid because the government doesn't want her to do that. It's illegal for her to have her own forms of electricity and supply her own water and all the rest of it. So little by little, everywhere we look, it's extremely obvious that profit reigns supreme. Profit is supreme, and a huge, horrible...
I want to remind people, again, that's exactly... That is more true than possible to explain, because remember, the shareholders are salivating at the fact that this gentleman, the CEO of Nestle, wants to rule all of as much water rights as he possibly can. He's saying, that is profitable. And remember, the only way that can happen is if governments around the world allow it to happen. Do you see the conflict of interest? Who is the main shareholder? Government. Nestle wants water rights. Who they're going to go to? Government. Do you see how this works, folks? We have to stop this vicious cycle. Let's start with Nestle.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, too, CEO, let's see, what can that be? How about criminal, eugenicist, awful, OFFAL, meaning, again, crap. These people have no business telling us what we should and should not do or eat or drink, and forcing us to comply by restricting our ability to get healthy food.
That's what their business is. What are you talking about?
That's why they need to be out of business. All of it. It's why we have at least one day a month as like a People's Day. And Clint, I know we were talking the other day, and I think it should also be a WTF Day. What the frack is going on? Because if more of us took the time to step back at the same time and begin to fortify our own homes for a very uncertain future and figure out, okay, what are we going to do for our water? What the frack is really going on anyway? What did you say they put in my food? Who wants to own my water? Human beings not having a right to water? How can we expect to proceed into what so many people are saying, oh, it's the new age. We've turned the corner. Oh, yay. Well, it's still a frackin' dark ages as far as I'm concerned, and it's getting darker by everyone trying to tell us to wait for somebody else to save us when we need to take action here and now in the three-dimensional world, which is all we really know.
And
all the religion.
Please understand, folks, that, technically what generally happens when someone tries to do this is, government will vote to the board members, and the board members will fire the CEO and hire a new one. And people, just like the President of the United States, and people will say, oh, thank God he's gone. Now we've got this new other man who's actually a corporation in there, and that's not good enough, folks. This company needs to die. This company needs to die. Not the office, not the board. The company needs to die.
Well, and so does the government Goldman Sachs connection. Let's get the CEOs.
Well,
if you're not raping and pillaging enough over here, we're going to put you here, and you can really do your job well.
Well, it used to be that there was the reason for corporations in the first place were to benefit the public. So when he talks about that, he's actually referring to that notion. But see, we've let that go. The people technically through government allow someone to incorporate to make it easier to benefit the people. That's not what happens in this type of usury situation, this type of stealing natural resources. That is not benefiting the public. So obviously, if the rule still applied, about 99% of corporations out there would have to die. They would not have the people's blessing or approval if people actually knew what these things were doing. Now, Karen, we're at the end of the show. Tell people how they can listen to the marathon.
We must all unite. The second Saturday of every month. So the marathon actually was last Saturday because the month started early on a Saturday. But the archives are running, and you can check the podcasts. Listen to Deborah Tavares. Listen to the conversation with Sheriff Mack. Listen to different alternative ways to actually make a difference. Start to think for yourself. Don't buy, don't comply, ask why. Don't buy anything you don't research for yourself. Especially don't buy the fact that other people are telling you they know better than you how you should eat, what you should feed your children, and what you should think. Don't comply by keeping your money in these huge institutions that are just raping us, and by buying products like Nestle. Begin to pull your money out of that system and ask why. Why are we here, and what am I doing? Am I part of the solution, or am I part of the problem? Have I put the blinders on and I've been feeding my children these Nestle products thinking they're good? Let's break down what are in those products and understand that the CEO of the company does not think genetically altered foods are harmful. And yet Nestle is full of them. UnitedWeStrike.com. The videos page, the health videos page has obesity. Watch that. Think for yourselves. And try and stand against a corporate takeover and into your moral stewardship. Thank you, Clint.
Well, I thank you kindly. That's it for today, folks. Join me Monday. We're going to revisit with Susan Bosky. So that should be fun. Also have... I'll tell you about the guests. We have Tammy Peppermint coming back on the 28th, and a special guest on the 25th. Should be interesting. We'll see you on Monday.